Welcome back, my friends, to the Mail Right Real Estate Agent Podcast Show. This is episode 102, and we have a special guest today. He's actually my home inspector, and beyond that, all my clients use him too. Mr. Glenn Kleint from Inspect It First is joining us today on our podcast. Glenn, would you give the audience a little shout out and let them know who you are and what you do?
Hey, good morning. Glenn Kleint with Inspect It First Property Inspection. And I do commercial and residential property inspections throughout San Diego County and into Riverside. And I've been doing it for about 3.5 years.
All right. I'm going to let Jonathan introduce himself, and then we'll come back over to you and start in on the third degree.
The third degree. Hi there, folks. I'm the founder of Mail Right and this podcast with my great co-host, Thomas. And we're a Facebook lead generation platform system. So if that sounds interesting, want more good quality leads, go to mail-right.com. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you. And I'm Thomas J. Nelson, residential realtor here in beautiful San Diego, California, where I'm never too busy for your referrals. And I do serve military clients, parents of UCSD and university students, and of course, I love serving the senior community here in San Diego. And how I serve them in part is with Mr. Glenn Kleint here, who's our gracious guest. Glenn, I know you're a busy guy, so thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Yeah, the market's keeping you busy right now, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
Yeah. So let's get into home inspections. First of all, something that surprised some of my friends who are practicing real estate in other states is there is a difference state to state about the requirements of being a home inspector. Do you need to be licensed in California?
No, surprisingly not. In California, you do not have to be licensed. You've got to be licensed for just about everything else that you do in California. You want to provide, for instance, home furnishings. You have to be licensed to do home furnishings. You, of course, have to be licensed as a real estate agent.
Yep.
Appraisers have to be licensed, but property inspectors, not so much. There is no requirement for licensing in California.
So what do you go through to basically become a home inspector? I mean, is there any criteria before you can just call yourself one?
In California, technically, no.
Wow.
But that's where California is kind of the Wild West in a lot of ways that way. Now, as an Inspect It First franchise owner, we are trained at a 2-week franchise school, about 120 hours of classroom training. Then we're required to join or pass what's called the National Home Inspectors Exam. About a 200-question exam. And then we're required to join an organization called ASHI, which is the American Society of Home Inspectors.
Okay.
And that's where our professional standards actually come from, is from ASHI. And the problem in California, of course, is without any licensing requirements, it's difficult to know what professional standard your inspector might be inspecting to.
Okay.
And that's where ASHI comes in.
Glenn, real quick, whatever you did with your microphone, it kind of took away from your vocal there.
Oh, sorry about that. I moved some papers.
Okay, yeah, there we go. So what I'm getting at by asking you this, because obviously I know this from interviewing you. When my regular home inspector told me he was going to retire, I of course was out looking for a new one, and that's how we met. And that was one of the things that impressed me, was that, like my inspector I was using at the time, you had gone through and gotten these certifications, even though they're not technically required in California. And so the point being, there is a huge difference from home inspector to home inspector as far as their qualifications and their experience.
Right. Yeah, that's very much the case. And without licensing, it's difficult, like I say, to know what professional standard it's being inspected to.
Right. So the question I have is, well, let's start with this. Why do people hire you to begin with? What is the general purpose of a home inspector?
Well, the general inspector, both commercial and residential are treated the same way. So be it a building or a home, the inspection is still the same.
Okay.
But they hire us to examine generally the condition of the home and all the major systems and components of the home, from roof to crawl space, everything in between, appliances, electric, plumbing, the whole 9 yards. So they want a general assessment of the condition of the property, how the systems are working. And it's not an exhaustive engineering examination by any means. I am not a contractor, so I'm not quoting on any repairs that are being done. I'm just calling out those systems and items within the home that need particular attention, like I say, from roof to crawl space and everything in between.
Okay. So when somebody is, I obviously sell residential real estate. So when I'm calling you out for a home inspection, the two times I'm calling you are when I take a listing, if my seller has taken my advice and done a pre-listing inspection, meaning they're going to have their own home inspected by you before they even put their home on the market to find out if there's anything they need to do, either repair-wise, or if they're not going to do the repairs, they can take that into consideration when settling on an asking price, or at least have a credit in mind. And then the other time I call on you, of course, is when I've sold a buyer a home and we're in escrow and we're doing our due diligence on the condition of the home. So how often would you say, because what I was surprised is when I moved to Southern California, to San Diego, in the Bay Area, it's just normal that you do a pre-listing inspection. But down here, it was not the norm. And I'm wondering, like, what percentage of the inspections do you do that are pre-MLS versus in escrow?
The pre-MLS, I would say, is probably 5% of my business.
Wow.
It's not very many, and it is surprising that more are not done. I know, as you say, in Northern California, they're very prevalent, but down here in San Diego, a lot of people still don't do them. So it's not a large percentage of the business. The majority of it is the actual purchase inspection. Okay.
And then what is the difference between doing the two types of inspections I mentioned? Because I know one is more intensive than the other.
Well, they're both the same inspection.
Okay.
Physically on site, they're the same inspection. They take about the same amount of time.
Okay.
The difference is in the report. For the pre-MLS inspection, the seller doesn't necessarily want to know what the serial numbers are on all the equipment in the house. They don't need to know necessarily all the systems that are working just fine. Whereas the buyer wants the reassurance that everything is documented as working just fine. Right. For the pre-sale, I stress simply with the seller what's wrong, what needs to be fixed. The report is maybe 10 pages long, whereas that same inspection for the buyer, the report might be 40 pages long.
Okay.
So there's just the level of the detail that's in the report.
Okay.
That's the only difference between them.
Well, and just to sidebar a little, I know what happens a lot is you have an obligation to report everything that you discover, and that includes code violations, even if the home isn't subject to code. So how do you handle that? Because obviously, from my point of view, I want my client to know everything about the house, but I also don't want them getting freaked out about the laundry list of perfect world reports that don't apply to the house. Right. So on your end of it, how do you guide the clients that are buying a home through the differences of what really is a health and safety or repair need versus that future honey-do list?
Yeah, it's all in the presentation, and it's all in discussing what the issue is. Let's take, for example, railings on guardrails and handrails of stairways. That's it's a real common issue that I find.
Right.
When the stairways were built, they were built to code, but that code was changed maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now those handrails and guardrails don't meet modern code. And so I'll call it out to the buyer, for instance, and explain to them, when the stairway was built, it was built to code. It's not to modern code. So you might want to consider upgrading it to get it to the proper safety condition. Right. But there's certainly no requirement that be done. So you're not required to go back and update it. Another example would be GFCIs. In older homes, ground fault circuit interrupter outlets didn't even exist.
Right.
So there's no requirement to go back and backfit them, but it's a sensible safety upgrade to do so. And so that's how I kind of present it to the buyer and to the seller as well.
Right.
Just so they're aware, okay, you don't have ground faults in the kitchen. When the house was built, it didn't need it, but it's a sensible upgrade to do so now. And,
right. And that one's kind of an arguable safety issue, even though it's, grandfathered in code-wise. I know that one comes up a lot on a request for repairs by a buyer.
Yes, it does.
But, and like to your point about the railings in stairwells, I know the big issue is the uprights are too wide and children can stick their head through them. And so that's not something we're going to ask the seller to change, because that would be considered an upgrade, not a repair. However, God forbid that wasn't brought to the attention of my clients that have kids. So that's something, as an agent, I want them to know all these things. And it kind of falls on kind of the teamwork that you and I have, or any realtor and inspector has, of explaining it in an appropriate way that makes them aware of the concerns, but keeps it realistic as far as expectations of what the seller is and isn't going to do. I'm leading up to my question, our first controversial question. How often do you run into pushback from your other realtors? Do you ever get a realtor that says, hey, don't write that one down, or let's not talk about that one? Do you run into that often?
I do not.
That's good to hear.
I'll get it every once in a while, and it's usually on an issue like what we were just discussing. Well, GFCIs weren't required. Should we actually report them now? And I always tell them I've got to report all the conditions, but in the summary, I'm going to tell them or explain to them that it's an upgrade rather than necessarily a repair. So it's very infrequent that I get any agents asking me not to report something. Sometimes the sellers will do that if they're if they happen to be there during the buyer's inspection, and so I just politically handle them and move them along. All
right. So what you're saying is we have a pretty ethical bunch here in San Diego.
My experience has been yes. It's very rare that I've run into agents that aren't, to be honest.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Let's do a little nitty gritty here. As far as in the house, when it comes to the overall structure of the house, the envelope of the house, what are you looking for structurally?
Structurally, we're looking at the exterior. We're looking at what the coverings look like, be it stucco, siding. Are there obvious issues there so far as buckled walls or walls that are shifting or moving? We're looking at what we can see of the foundation. If it's a slab foundation, there's not a whole lot we can see. If there's a crawl space, then of course we're going into the crawl space to check the foundation and the floor structure there. The roof is probably one of the most important parts of the envelope of the exterior. And if we can get on the roof safely, we're on the roof. If it's a little bit too high, then I've got other tools that I can use for that. So we're looking for upkeep issues. Again, obvious visual defects. We're not going to be opening walls up. I've got an infrared camera that can see temperature differences on wall surfaces, but can't see through walls necessarily. So it's just, again, a matter of setting expectations of we're looking for obvious, readily accessible visual indications of any concerns.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the infrared camera, and I've seen other inspectors use them too on my listings. What are you reading when you're seeing temperature differences in the walls? What is that actually telling you?
It's telling us there's something that's causing a temperature difference on the surface. Now, an infrared camera can only see the surface it's looking at.
Okay.
And so let's say, for instance, there's a hot water line behind a wall. It's going to be causing a temperature difference at the surface of that wall, and I can see that temperature difference that it's causing. So I can use that camera now to look for water leaks that might be hidden from view.
Okay.
I can also use it to determine if there are electrical outlets or electrical appliances that are overheating. I can also use it to determine how our comfort systems are performing. I can usually see the ductwork within the walls by the temperature differences caused. So there's a lot of really practical, and I have found on a couple of occasions slab leaks using the infrared camera because of the temperature difference that it causes.
Okay. I want to talk about slab in a minute, but I also want to introduce your girlfriend at this point because your other piece of technology that helps you inspect roofs. You want to talk about her?
Yes, my pride and joy. It is a unique Typhoon 500 drone. It's a quadcopter. A drone technically can be weaponized, and she cannot be weaponized. So her name is Laura, and she'll go to 4,000 feet in about 10 miles. She's GPS enabled, 16 megapixel still images, 1080p video. And I'm not a fan of heights. I don't particularly like ladders, and when I go on concrete tile roofs at 260 pounds, there's a good chance I'm going to break more tiles than I can learn about. And so I put Laura in the air. I let her take care of the inspection for me. Typical inspection, I'll take 60, 70 photographs, and I can pretty well tell you down to the granular level what the surface of the roof looks like from the drone. And that's been a great tool.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that sets you apart, because you're the only home inspector I've ever seen use drone technology for that, because a lot of inspectors, including termite inspectors, simply won't do second-story homes or taller. And that puts you in a unique position to accept those jobs, because we don't lose the ability to inspect the roof, even if it's a 2-story.
Exactly. I've done as high as a 3-story roof before. So, okay. Laura does not mind heights. She'll go to 4,000 feet. So,
we talked about the exterior and the envelope of the house, including slab, and this may be unique to San Diego. I don't know in other parts of the country, but in San Diego, we have a lot of slab foundation, which is basically just similar to like a garage. It's just a slab of concrete poured, and then the house is built on top of it with no crawl space or basement. So what we're noticing, though, especially in our East County, whether that's because of the heat or the seismic activity or the quality of the pour originally, is a lot of slab crack. And I'm curious, when it's when a slab crack is pretty obvious, there's some significant damage, but there's a lot of slab crack that is less than the width of a pencil. How do you know when you're inspecting, or do you know if a house is experiencing that when you obviously can't see the majority of the floor?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. Number one, if it's a slab, I'm inspecting all the perimeter that I can see visually, and I'm looking for any indications of cracks. If I see, and 95% of slabs have some degree of little micro cracks on them. Pretty much all concrete cracks to one degree or another. But I'm looking for larger cracks. If I see those indicators, I'm calling out that a foundation contractor examine it more. Another way to determine if there's a slab crack is to look at the water meter. That's the first thing I always look at when I do a house. I go to the meter.
Really?
And determine, is the meter turning? because if the meter's turning, there's water running somewhere. If there's water running somewhere, then it's either an appliance or a slab leak. And I have seen a couple of slab leaks that way, and then I confirm it with the infrared.
Okay.
And then, of course, walking on the house, very sensitive on the feet to see if you feel any slopes or rises, because normally a foundation will buckle to a certain degree and you'll have a little bit of a rise to it. So there's a number of ways that way, but if in doubt, I always recommend that a foundation contractor come in and examine it further.
Well, and that's true of all the components of the house too. I mean, I know I've had clients say, well, why do I got to hire a roofer if Glenn was just out there now? And what I typically explain to people is you're kind of the general practitioner that you go see before you get referred to the specialist. I'm not going to go see a surgeon for a sniffle unless while seeing you for the sniffle, you determine something else is required.
A sniffle, Thomas. All right. We're going to go for our break, folks, and then we'll be coming back and learning some more about the home inspector. Be back in a second, folks. We're coming back, folks. Hopefully, Thomas has got over his sniffles. We're having a fascinating conversation with the home inspector. It's like the school inspector, isn't it? So off you go, Thomas.
Glenn, I never had an older brother, but having Jonathan as a co-host, it feels like it's close to it. All right. So back to what we were talking about, the components of the house. Now, when it comes to electrical and plumbing and the appliances, to what degree do you inspect them before it's time to call in a specialist?
Well, let's start with the electrical. I open the main panel, inspect the interior of the panel. We're looking for wiring, breakers, melted bus bars, scorched wires. We're also testing all the electrical components within the house. Every receptacle I can get to physically, we're putting a tool in and testing. So when I see issues such as scorched wires, maybe there's openings on the front of a panel that somebody can stick a finger in and feel what 200 amps feels like, which will only hurt for a moment. So at that point, I've exceeded my skills since I'm not an electrical contractor, and I recommend that electricians come in. Plumbing, same thing. We're testing functional drainage, functional flow, water pressure throughout the house, all the fixtures, all the bathrooms. If there are obvious drainage issues or flow issues, then, of course, I refer those to plumbers. Pretty much every component of the house, when I see something that is outside the norm, I'm calling it out either that a contractor should look at it, or if it's a small little maintenance item, then I recommend that just a repair person look at it.
Sure. So it's the reason why you're the first step in this process, because, I mean, obviously it's a lot more cost effective to have you with a knowledge of all these components come out and give us a general report on the property before we start trying to schedule 9 different specialists and not all of them do estimates for free, because if you want a report, that's typically when they start charging you. And, like an average roof inspection alone is $300 or more, HVAC, plumbers, electricians. So this is a good first step in inspecting a home, and then you can determine from there what is in need of more inspection and what you can live with. Some of the stuff you point out, some of my clients, they're like, okay, that's fine. It's a 40-year-old home. I expect there to be some problems.
Yeah. Actually, Thomas, can I ask a question?
Please.
Basically, I was thinking of 3 areas that I don't know the property in your particular area, but the 3 areas that come to mind is asbestos, pests, termites, other similar pests, and increasingly a lot of housing of having solar panels put on them. And what are the specialised concerns around that? So it's one question, but there's 3 parts to it, but I don't know any of those parts really affect you.
Well, we're looking 4 areas that will commonly have asbestos, be it popcorn ceilings is a real common asbestos source prior to the early 80s. Also asbestos vent lines on water heaters and furnaces. Mm-hmm. And we don't test for asbestos, but I call it out as a possible source and recommend that it be tested for asbestos. Asbestos is, if you leave it alone, it'll leave you alone. It's only when you disturb it and you make it into a talcum powder that it gets into your lungs and causes the health issues. So I'll usually brief clients by telling them, leave it alone. If you're going to ever disturb it, get it tested for asbestos. If it's asbestos, then you need to have an asbestos remediator remove it. They come in with the masks and all the special tools that they do. So far as solar, that's best left to the solar contractor. However, with the drone aircraft, I normally do inspect the solar panels just to see if they're clean, if they appear to be loose, if they appear to be properly installed. But when it gets into the inner workings of the solar controls, that's best left to the solar contractor. And what was the third one again?
Pests.
Oh, pests. Pests and termites. I am not a licensed termite inspector, but I am looking for them. Normally, we'll see indicators of possible termites. Now, a termite inspector is allowed to do a physical touch and a probing inspection, whereas I'm not allowed to do that because I'm not licensed to put it back together again, whereas the termite inspector is. So if I see indications of termites, I call that out and recommend that a termite inspector look at it. When I'm in an attic or a crawl space, if I see animal droppings or rodent droppings, I'm calling those out and recommending that a pest and termite contractor look at those.
Yeah, and typically we are in concert with Glenn having our termite inspector come out. Oftentimes on the exact same day, they're overlapping each other. So that with I'm not sure around the country how it affects housing, but I've never dealt with termites more than in Southern California, even compared to Northern California. It's a bigger issue down here because of our desert climate. It seems to be a breeding ground. But, I appreciate you bringing that up, Jonathan, because you made me think of another question. When it comes to swimming pools, since we're in Southern California, what do you do about swimming pools? Do you inspect those?
I inspect them from a generalist standpoint. When it gets into the heater functioning, the motor functioning, the pumps functioning, at that point, I recommend that we have an actual licensed pool inspector look at it. And the pool inspector's got to be licensed, but again, I don't have to be, but which is kind of odd.
Yeah.
But I've got a number of pool inspectors that I can refer. I'm sure you have guys you know as well. But when it gets into the inner workings of the guts of the equipment in the pool, I normally defer to a pool inspector for those. But I do look at the pool and spa from a generalist standpoint, gates, door alarms, the physical condition of the deck and the pool itself.
Okay. And the same goes for septic and wells, because we do have a lot of those here in East County.
Yep, same thing.
Okay. I wanted to ask you what I can remember years ago my previous inspector being up in an attic and all of a sudden hearing yelling and screaming, and he had come across a family of raccoons living in an attic, and I don't think they were too happy to see him. What's some of the oddest things you've seen during an inspection?
Boy, there's been a lot. I think the most memorable was a house I did out in Verona about a year and a half ago. The house had been basically obliterated, I think is the best word that comes to mind. And all the fixtures in the bathrooms, for instance, were gone. And when I went to go inspect the master bathroom, the door was closed. So I opened it about 2 inches, heard the rattle of a rattlesnake.
Oh.
closed the door, looked at the buyer and said, "This inspection is over." And her eyes were about as wide as saucers, and she's nodding rapidly, going, "Yes, this is over." So that was probably the oddest, was running into the rattlesnake in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Kind of concerning. Other than that, general, normal, weird stuff. No ghosts or anything.
Have you ever, one of the problems people might not realize we have out here is beehives. Have you ever? We actually have beehive removal companies in San Diego. Have you run into that?
I have, yeah, particularly around chimneys.
Yes.
They seem to like to hive around there. They can get inside under the rain cap and the spark arrestor and form a real nice little hive in there. So I see that quite a bit. We see a lot of mud hornets. We also see a lot of black widow eggs, particularly inside electrical panels. So yeah, there's a number of things that we'll routinely see.
When you're done with an inspection, how do you deal with people coming back at you weeks later and they're saying, "Hey, you should have caught this. I found this," and they get all upset about something? A common one I run into is a house has been sitting vacant for a while, and now all of a sudden there's a family of 4 using it, and the plumbing backs up. Right. And they can't understand why you didn't tell them that there was a clog in the drain or something like that.
Right. And that's a tough one because we do operate all of the plumbing fixtures during the inspection. And typical property inspection, I'm taking 200 to maybe 250 photographs. To be honest with you, the majority of those are defensive. I do take photographs, for instance, of showers in operation. I take pictures of the drain pan to show there's no water backing up, but those photographs don't necessarily make it into the report. So normally if somebody's got a real problem, which really does not happen very often. I think I can count on maybe 2 or 3 fingers the number of times that has happened. But I'll try to work with them and try to explain to them again, everything was working at the time of the inspection, and then try to resolve it as peacefully as I can from there, because I'm not there to make them feel bad.
Right.
But I do have to explain to them, hey, the system was working that day. That's all I can tell you. What happened next week, I can't tell you. So it's difficult, and like I say, thankfully it's happened 2 or 3 times out of the about 1,000 inspections I've done so far. So I'm grateful for that. Doesn't happen very often.
I can remember one time you and I going to a house to do an inspection, and I think it was out in La Mesa, and we couldn't get the gas to work, and went outside and found out that the gas meter had been stacked like it looked like it was a functioning gas meter, but you touched it and the whole thing fell apart in like 9 pieces. Somebody had carefully put it all back together, but it wasn't connected and it wasn't attached to the components. So you do see stuff out there. And the reason I bring that up is I'm bringing up a reinspection. What's a policy of most home inspectors, your policy included, when something goes awry and you can't complete, like you were mentioning the rattlesnake, obviously you have to come back and reinspect. Is there a charge to do a reinspection fee?
Well, it's on kind of a case-by-case basis, but the normal reinspection fee is half of the original. Okay. And normally what I'll do is I'll print out my list of all the defects and maintenances and safety issues that I found, and I'll go around the house and re-verify every one of them. And then if there are changes to make to the report, then I'll go back and issue a new property inspection report.
Okay.
And those don't happen very often either. I would say maybe once a month at the most.
Okay. Now, do you often see that, or I don't even know if you're privy to this, but when that happens to an agent representing a buyer, do you often see that the seller or the seller's agent picks up your reinspect tab, since it was typically their doing that caused this?
Yeah, normally it's the seller's side that takes care of the reinspection fee. And I usually will tell let's say, for instance, that gas meter we found that was disassembled. I'll usually tell the agent, hey, this is not the buyer's problem. I would suggest that the seller's agent take care of it. And that way, if they weren't already thinking in those terms, they'll start thinking in those terms. That's not the buyer's fault. You know, They shouldn't be held for that. Right. And I have had, and I don't know, maybe this isn't the best forum to say it, but I have had buyers that the sellers just flat out refused to pay for the reinspection, and I've gone out there and just done it for nothing. Because I don't want to stress the buyers out. And it's usually not that big a deal, to be honest with you. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one other thing I wanted to mention, since you bring that up, is, and thank you for your service. You served in our Coast Guard. And one of the things I like about you is you give our military a military discount on their inspection.
Yep, so. Military and first responders. All the first responders get it. And that includes vets and retired.
Yep. Well, I want to thank you very much. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to segue from the audio portion of our show into the video portion only. And there I want to talk about the book you wrote. So we're going to wrap up the audio portion. Any last questions before we do so, Jonathan?
No, I think it's not an area I know much about, actually. But I think it's been interesting, actually, because it's a side that most people just don't realize, really, do they, Thomas?
No, it's something that, because I'm in the business, I take it for granted sometimes, and I have to always remind myself this may be the first time this person's going through something like this, even though it's probably the third time that week I am. Glenn, we're going to have you sign off on the audio portion, so why don't you share with people how they can reach you?
Number of ways. You can find us on the web at inspectitfirst.com, with the first being the number 1ST. And if you do we're actually headquartered out of Cleveland. So if you go in there, select the map, go to California, you'll find I'm the only franchise owner in California. So it'll be fairly easy to find me there. You can always call me anytime, 619-905-0110. And I'm the one answering, so you don't have to worry about an answering service. The only time I don't answer is when I'm in a crawl space or flying the drone. And then you can contact me by email, gclient, which is KLEINT, at inspectitfirst.com, with the first being the number 1ST.
All right.
You can also reach me through the ASHI website if you want to look me up there.
And that's ASHI.
ASHI, American Society of Home Inspectors.
Okay. All right. And Jonathan, will you share with people how they can reach you?
Oh, it's quite simple, folks. You can either get me on Twitter at Jonathan Denwood, or you can get us on the Facebook page, where you'll be able to see all our videos and additional information on the Mail-Right Facebook page. Or you can email me at jonathan@mail-right.com. Back to you, Thomas.
And for me, you can reach me on my website, thomasjnelsonrealtor.com. Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn are where you can find me on social media. And, of course, in San Diego, California, I'm never too busy for your referrals. So if you're an out-of-area agent sending someone to San Diego, let's become referral partners. And, of course, I want to thank our guest, again, Glenn Client, Inspect It First. Thank you for joining us on today's show. And if you want to hear about Glenn's book that he wrote, as well as some other bonus material, please join us now on our video component on YouTube.
And Thomas and Jonathan, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice break as well.
All right. So now we're into the bonus material. And Glenn, I wanted to ask you about your book, because I know you wrote a novel. First of all, it's called Offerings of Shiloh. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And first of all, is the book out and available for purchase?
It is. It's on Amazon as paperback, and also Amazon as Kindle.
Okay, and this is, of course, a book about home inspections, right?
No.
Oh, it's not. So what the heck
Yeah,
did you write a book about?
it's a book about the Civil War, the American Civil War, the Battle of Shiloh, which was in April of 1862, and it stemmed from a visit actually I took to Shiloh, which is in southwestern Tennessee, back in 2006. And I've been to all the major Civil War sites, Gettysburg to Vicksburg and everything in between. Shiloh is gorgeous. It is physically gorgeous. It's on the Tennessee River, which is one of the few rivers in North America that flows northward. And it's at a place called Pittsburgh Landing, which is just east of Selmer, Tennessee, if you're familiar with Tennessee. But it's gorgeous, and it is the eeriest place I have ever been in my entire life.
You feel the history?
Yeah, 24,000 guys were dead in 2 days.
Wow.
And so just walking the fields, it's there's something there. And I really picked up on it when I visited, and I had to write a book about it. So it's an historical novel.
Okay. So in other words, it's a fictional story based on an actual event?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's as historically accurate as I could make it. I've had dozens of Civil War reenactors who really take this stuff seriously. And God bless them for it. And I've had dozens of them contact me and tell me how accurate it is, down to the details. But all the characters are fictitious, mainly because I didn't want to get somebody wrong.
Right.
I didn't want to ascribe to somebody something they said or did that I couldn't prove that they said or did, just because I didn't want to dishonor somebody. So,
what do you think it is? I mean, we've been in a lot of wars, and World War II is talked about a lot. But what is it about the Civil War do you think that? I mean, it compelled you to write a book. As you mentioned, there's Civil War reenactors. I don't hear much about World War I or World War II reenactors. What is it about our Civil War that has so many people focused on that they seem to have a passion for the history of it?
I think because it happened on American soil, first off, and it was Americans killing Americans. It was also, and I don't know if it'll soon be surpassed, but there were more deaths in the Civil War than all of the nation's wars combined.
Wow.
There were 626,000 fatalities in the Civil War. And so you combine every other war that the United States has ever been in, you add them all up, and it does not come to the total that died in the Civil War.
Yeah.
And I think the Civil War was fought by non-professional soldiers. Most of the guys thought it would be a real fun adventure to go on. Some of the forces joined under the threat of the noose that was hanging over a tree. Would you like to volunteer? Would you like to take a dangle? And they chose to volunteer. So there were a lot of unwilling participants, and most of the guys really didn't know what was going on. A lot of them did, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them had never left the 2-mile square radius around their house, and suddenly they're somewhere else. And it was just it was incredibly vicious. The tactics, or I should say the technology, had outraced the tactics. We now had cannons that could fire to a half a mile away, but we were still doing Napoleonic massed marches. And
yeah.
So
I never got that.
Yeah.
Why they would just stand in a line and walk right towards it. That never made any sense.
Well, because the soldiers were not professional soldiers, and so the only way the officers knew how to control them was to keep them massed. And the fear was that if you let independent groups go, 80% of them would end up west of the Mississippi River because they would run.
Right.
And so the only way to control them, they thought, was to keep them in massed formations. And So a single cannonball would blow up overhead, and you had 50 dead guys. It was slaughter on a unprecedented scale. And
well, and there's a lot of strategy that I know from studying the Civil War too, that you can bring to business. I mean, it's incredible, the correlation. I mean, no better personified than in Sun Tzu's The Art of War. But the reason I bring up your book, and I appreciate that you wrote one, but I know a lot of agents that have written books or aspire to write books. What was your process? I mean, how do you take it from this thought, hey, I should write a book about this, to actually doing it and then getting it published?
Well, the published part is actually the easiest part. Most publishing houses will not touch first-time authors anymore.
Right.
And so the only way to go is self-publishing. And if you self-publish it on Amazon, it's incredibly easy. To do. It's difficult to get the book formatted properly, but once you've done that, it's super easy to do. The process for me was kind of interesting. I play a lot of golf, and most golfers will have some sort of a trigger mechanism. They'll lift the shoulder of their shirt. They'll touch their nose. They'll do something physically that tells them, now I'm in the golf zone, and nothing else matters. And for me, it was I bought I'm a big supporter of St. Jude Children's Hospital, and for me it was a St. Jude hat that I bought online. And when I put the hat on, that was my trigger, and nothing else mattered in the world as soon as I put the hat on. And I had many nights, hundreds of them. It took me 5 years to write.
Wow.
I had hundreds of nights where I would start writing about 5 o'clock in the evening, and the next thing I knew, it was midnight or 1 o'clock. And where I had been for the last 6 hours, 7 hours, I have no idea. But I know I was 25 pages further along.
Nice.
And so it's a lot of fun. It is it's a tremendous, and all the characters are you. They will say and do anything that you want them to, because you create them. And it's amazing how much you care about them after a while, because to this day, 5 years later, I still think about Stan or Tanner or Alan or Levi or Samuel, and I just hope I did everything for them I could. But it's amazing. They're still, they're a party. They're you, right? And so it's amazing how much I still care about my guys. And I hope I did everything for them I could. But,
can I ask a question?
Please.
Glenn, because of your research and interest in the Civil War, was there a fact or something you didn't realise that really surprised you through your research?
It was at Shiloh. There were two things. Number one was the park ranger at the visitor center pointed out that soldiers in the Civil War didn't wear dog tags, and there were no driver's licenses. There were no licenses at all. So most of the soldiers went into battle with no identification on them. And the park ranger mentioned the fact that your brother or your father or your husband was maybe in this area, but they never came back. How long would you wait for them to come back? Because you have no idea what happened to them. And at Shiloh, there are 7 mass burial pits that Grant dug the day after the battle, and he just dumped the bodies in them. And so there's no idea who's in these holes. And that struck me. I had never really thought about that before. The other, and that just speaks to the incredible tragedy of the Civil War, is that most of the guys, we have no idea who died. And the other thing was at Shiloh, they had a musket that had been found on the battlefield. And the way they did it was they would, insert the musket ball in and then put the primer cap on, pull the hammer back, fire the weapon, and then repeat. They had a musket that was there on the battlefield that had 13 mini balls embedded in the barrel. So the soldier had loaded it, had probably in his panic and horror, had probably forgotten to put a cap on, had pulled the trigger. It had not fired, but he had not known it had not fired. He jammed another mini ball in, and he did that 13 times.
Wow.
And it spoke to me of the absolute horror that you must have experienced to have reloaded your weapon 13 times and never actually discharged it. And so what I tried to capture in this book is the absolute horror of what that must have been like.
Because I don't know if I'm correct about that particular battle of Grant, wasn't it where he made where the Union tactics really changed under his generalship, where in previous campaigns the federal forces had basically, even if they had caused quite large casualty to the Confederate side, they had redrawn. But under Grant, under that particular battle, there was no redraw, even though it was a bloodbath. He just drawed on more reserves. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And it was a Sunday morning when the battle started, so half the Union forces were still asleep when the whole thing started. Nobody could find Sherman, and Grant was downriver, so he was about 20 miles north of Shiloh, so he wasn't even aware that anything was going on. Nobody knows how the battle actually started because everybody that was there at the start was not around at the end anymore. So it's a very mysterious battle that way. It ended up being a Union victory, mainly because the Confederates were out of supplies, and after the first day they started pillaging for supplies, shoes, food, coats, and they just kind of generally lost interest and started leaving. And then the next day Grant counterattacked and they all ran away. So it ended up being a Union victory. The casualties, though, were pretty well split. It was about 12,000 per side. But it was ultimately a Union victory.
How have your book sales been going?
It kind of trickles a little bit now and again. I have about 3,000 likes on the Facebook page, which is not translated into sales, unfortunately. But every once in a while, I'll get a small check from Amazon, for sales. I would love this thing would make one heck of a movie, I think. And if I could ever get somebody to make it into a movie, oh my God, this thing would be an awesome movie.
Well, we'll certainly hope for that for you. I mean, it sounds like you're promoting it though. You're on social media, and does it have its own website? No, it does not have its own website, but it has its own Facebook page, Offerings of Shiloh. Okay.
And it's a fairly long novel. It's 412 pages of single space Times New Roman 10 for those that are interested in that. And the battle starts about a third of the way through. And I will tell you, when I wrote the battle scenes, I went through about a year where I couldn't sleep because they're so fast, they're so frenetic, and they're so vicious that I had about a year that I really couldn't sleep. And so I've had a number of people tell me that when they read it, they had to remind themselves that they knew who wrote it. And that's not my personality. But the book gets down and dirty to the extreme. But it's not gratuitous. It's just vicious.
Right. Well, if people want to check out the book, obviously they can go on Amazon, and then there's the Facebook page.
Correct.
All right. And again, if they want to hire you as a home inspector in San Diego County or Riverside County, correct?
I go up into as far north as like Lake Elsinore area. So it's the southern part of Riverside.
Okay.
I've also gone as far out as Brawley and El Centro, but those were commercial inspections out there.
Okay. And once again, will you remind people how they can reach you?
Best way is phone, 619-905-0110. Second best would be email, Glenn, gclient@inspectitfirst.com. And then the website and the ASHI website you can find me on. And I've got a Facebook page for the business as well.
Well, Glenn, I really appreciate you coming on and both sharing your knowledge about home inspection and then this little hidden treasure trove of you being an author. It's something that ceases to surprise me anymore in this industry. I meet so many realtor authors, realtor musicians, realtor jewelry makers, and now that expands to the home inspection world too. We're a lot of free spirits in this industry.
Yes, indeed.
Jonathan, will you remind people how they can reach you?
Oh, it's no problem, folks. The best way is to use Twitter or go to the Mail Right Facebook page and leave a comment on this video. We love more to get more feedback. That'd be great.
All right. And once again, I'm Thomas J. Nelson, residential realtor here in San Diego, California. You can reach me at thomasjnelsonrealtor.com. Social media, and my phone number is 858-232-8722. Whether you have comments about the show, if you have questions about real estate, or you want to network about real estate, I'm your guy. And, of course, we would love to hear from you on our iTunes or Stitcher posts where you can leave comments about our episodes on our weekly show. All right, we'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. And once again, Glenn, thanks so much for being on our show today.